Welcome to Niche Conversations. I'm Jessica DeWitt, one of the editors here at the network in Canadian History and Environment. And today I am joined by Sarah Pickman and Isabelle Gapp. Do you want to tell us about yourselves?
Izzy, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Izzy Gapp. I am an editor with NiCHE and I'm an art historian based at the University of Aberdeen.
And I'm Sarah Pickman. I'm an independent historian who's based just north of New York City.
Wonderful. Well, welcome. At this point, Izzy, is this your fourth time on Niche Conversations, I think? So a veteran, yeah. And I invited both of you on because we are currently running part 5 of Visual Cultures of the Circumpolar North. And this is a series that Izzy has spearheaded. And this time around, Sarah, you have come on as a guest editor. So I thought I would start off by kind of talking about some of the stuff you mentioned in the introduction. The theme this part is new research in Arctic pasts. And I wondered, you kind of talk about how until relatively recently, the visual culture of the Arctic has been under-examined. And I wonder if you could talk about some of the forces that have changed that over the past several years.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've lost Sarah.
Oh, no.
But I'm happy to get started while we wait for her to hopefully rejoin us.
Let's see if I can get her back in.
There we go.
Sure.
There we go. Did you hear my question?
I did. Somehow I got bumped out, but I came back just in time.
Okay,
good. I'm happy to get us started. One of the biggest sort of forces, I think, when we sort of address this in the introduction, is climate change and the attention just across all fields and in the public media that's being given to the Arctic.
Yeah.
I also think on a more specific front, as an art historian who works on sort of broadly art, history, visual and material culture around the Arctic, I think it also comes into play with things like eco-criticism, which has grown considerably without, removing the Arctic from the conversation. Eco-critical art history has grown exponentially over the last sort of 5 to 10 years as well. And I think the Arctic is just a natural kind of fit for the ways in which people are obviously then thinking about the environmental repercussions of taking place. Sarah, is anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would say also, I think definitely anthropogenic climate change. I think in the realm of history and humanities more broadly, there's also been a move towards blue humanities, so thinking about water, ocean history, and thinking about the oceans as a place that doesn't just have a history of science being done to it, but has a human history as well. And so I think again, there's a natural sort of fit there with looking at the cryosphere, looking at other kinds of if you want to call them extreme environments that haven't been considered from a historical perspective up until recent decades. I think there's also been a recognition among historians that the Arctic and the cryosphere more broadly is a really interesting place for thinking about certain kinds of questions, thinking about indigenous outsider encounters, thinking about cultural history, thinking about media history, a place that for most people only exists through the media that they consume, and that's been true for several hundred years. So I think there's been a recognition that the Circumpolar North is an interesting place for thinking about some of those kinds of questions.
So you're kind of describing both like a popular public kind of acknowledgement of the space, but also like an academic, like it's kind of converging to create like kind of the perfect storm. I don't know if that's the right word, but like it's really come together in this moment where Arctic culture, I think I'm seeing it not just on NiCHE, but elsewhere, is really getting a lot of traction. And I think go ahead.
I think as well, just to add part of that as well is that Indigenous artists in themselves are being given much more of a platform in things like biennales and in exhibitions and in sort of the wider sort of history of art and curatorial space. And that is in turn propelling those voices more to the fore, which is then allowing that field of scholarship to grow in turn.
Yes. Yeah. And that's such an important point. And it's also like, I've talked with other scholars on NiCHE conversations, I believe, and elsewhere, about how the coldness of the Arctic forces, white people primarily to actually acknowledge like nature. Like, you can't ignore it in ways that you can in other environments, other ecosystems, and kind of helps people understand how we interact, like how we're dependent on the environment, how we interact, how we, evolve for it, like in ways that then help people to understand how we do it in other places as well, right? So it's an interesting space. And as this series shows, it has endless possibilities of thinking about it. It's so fascinating. So, but I did want to like talk a bit more about you two, because you mentioned kind of briefly, I think, in the introduction, that both of you have experienced shifts in your own work, in your own career, in your own thought processes about Arctic visual culture. And I thought maybe both of you could talk about that a bit more.
Absolutely. I'm happy to take that first. Jessica, the one thing you said earlier did make me think of something that I think is really important in thinking about the Circumpolar North, and especially about visual studies in the Circumpolar North, which is that this thing that we're seeing right now that you mentioned, of this kind of convergence of popular media and academic discourse, academic studies of the far north, is something that's happened kind of cyclically for a long time. And I think that's really interesting. And some of the contributors to this series, to Series 5, have addressed this, that as far back as the early 19th century, and probably even earlier, I would argue, there's been this popular interest, and as well as an academic interest, and they kind of feed off of each other. So you have popular audiences that are consuming things like panoramas in the 19th century. Now they're consuming TV shows and movies and even video games set in the Arctic. But there's always been a popular interest that I think in some ways helps continue to drive support for the scholarly interest, and vice versa. So I think that's just something interesting that maybe we can talk about a little bit more later when we talk about the contributors. But thinking about shifts in our own research, so I work primarily outside of the academy. So thinking about my own scholarly trajectory, the last few years I've been thinking about ways in which those of us who are situated either at what you want to call alt-act institutions, or those of us who work outside of academia, can continue to be part of these conversations. And I think NiCHE is doing an amazing job with that. But I've been thinking a lot about different spaces, whether they're virtual conversations, virtual conferences, websites, different kinds of scholarly blogs, or even more traditional kinds of academic spaces like peer-reviewed journals. How do we make those kinds of places open to people who aren't traditionally situated, especially as the job market continues to be what it is? But I think it's also an opportunity for collaboration. And in the polar community, polar studies community, I found a lot of really amazing, open potential collaborators, people who are interested in sharing what they know about particular archives, people who are interested in collaborating on projects, even interested in things like taking photos for each other in archives, or helping to digitize sources so that they become more widely available, and also just mentoring the next generation of master's and PhD students who are coming up and interested in these kinds of fields. So that's what I would say from my own perspective.
Yeah. Izzy?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, one of the biggest sort of things that I've seen really over the last 5 years since I finished my PhD is kind of the rising just sort of normalcy surrounding the kind of work I do. So sort of the idea of an art historian collaborating with a glaciologist when I was in my PhD was weird. It wasn't new, but it was unusual. And now I'm very lucky to supervise a PhD student who is doing an entire PhD on glacial landscapes, and where being a part of that conversation with glaciologists is now really being accepted as part of the discipline. And I think more in my work, the bigger questions I've started asking myself in the last couple of years is sort of who, and I guess we're always asking ourselves this as academics, like, who are we doing it for? Why are we doing this? And, you know, who is really going to read what I write? And for me, one of the most rewarding things to come out of a paper that I wrote was a collaboration with the Inuit Print Studios in Kenai, which is sort of an ongoing collaboration now for the last 3 years. And, you know, I'm not a contemporary art historian in the slightest. So from a research perspective, the fact that my subjects are alive and kicking is in itself a novelty. Actually getting to work with artists and getting to think about the kind of questions I've been engaged with for the last decade around the importance of landscape painting and landscape art history and the kind of materiality of art making, and being able to actually think about those ideas in collaboration with artists who are actively making art in the Arctic, I think has been very rewarding, and also kind of, for me, shaped how I want to be an art historian. And that to be an art historian of the Arctic, you have to go to the Arctic. It isn't cheap, but it, you know, there is a need, I think, for us to at least once experience the space that we're writing about, to understand it as a lived space as well as a place to be studied.
Yeah, I'm appreciating this kind of idea of taking down the walls, you know, of academia, like bringing this stuff to the public, or like, you know, Sarah, as a fellow independent scholar, like really figuring out, you know, what are we beyond like our departments or like these like institutional boundaries, like what is at the soul of these collections of knowledge, of ways of knowing, etc., and how do we like interconnect it with other beings and other beings, whether they be other people or, you know, landscapes or, you know, more than human animals, etc. Yeah, and it's just such a dynamic field for that. I think it's really yeah, such a great inspiration for that kind of work, and I think that's coming through in this series, in this part as well. So yeah, thanks to both of you for helping keep that going, the work going. Yeah, so I guess we'll wrap up today by talking about part 5 of Visual Cultures of the Circumpolar North. What's going on in it? What are these specific contributors bringing to the table that hasn't been covered yet or is new, etc.?
Well, I think one thing is, one thing I'll just say on the outset is, you know, I both said once we ran the call that we were so impressed by the quality of the abstracts we received. Izzy, I think you said that this was one of the most outstanding groups, and you've worked on the series many times before. And so we were both really pleased with how wide the sort of like breadth and depth of the kinds of proposals that we got. And I think that the resulting pieces have really been fantastic. One of the things that's great to see is the number of pieces that we received, most of which have now gone live, that are about specific curatorial projects or engage with contemporary artists and are really thinking about curation as a venue for exploring some of these kinds of questions about who is this work for, who are studies of the Circumpolar North for, who gets to participate, how do we think about the kind of colonial and extractive histories of the North when we think about doing contemporary kinds of work, how do people respond to that, what kinds of things can we consider as archives, what are our research materials, and the ways in which those some of these pieces have really thought about doing that in a public facing way through curating exhibits and reflections on the curation of exhibits. So that's been really fantastic, and of course has led to some really incredible visuals on a lot of these pieces.
Yes.
Would you agree with the kind of curatorial focus that has really been the
backbone? Absolutely. I think that's something that we haven't really had in the past series that has really come to the fore. And the fact that it's sort of active reflections on recent exhibitions as well. This isn't just a sort of reflection on the history of curating the Arctic. This is on people who are actively working around the process of curation.
Yeah, I'm noticing that. It's kind of like breaking it down, like some of the linearity around, you know, studying the past or studying the present, and like kind of, I think showing kind of that it's all, you know, it's really one and the same thing in a lot of ways. Like we can't really understand these recent exhibits if we don't think about the history behind the people who made this art, etc. I think this part has really done that well. Yeah,
The other thing I would add is that the other contributions that that I think the other area that has been really strong in the contributions we received is rethinking or thinking through what are our circumpolar archives. So there are people who have looked at what we might call overlooked or under-examined archival materials and thinking about the second piece that we ran on the ditch system that was used for gold mining in early 20th century Alaska, or thinking about Eve Cresnell's work in Greenland, which was the subject of our third piece. But also thinking about, or the first piece that we ran, thinking about the ways in which scientific imagery is itself a kind of archive, and an archive that doesn't, whose suppositions don't really get questioned all that often, but what are the kinds of assumptions that get built into scientific imagery. So thinking about I think there's been a kind of a nice almost 50-50 division of sort of thinking through curatorial work, but also thinking through archival work and thinking through what are our historical sources, and then thinking through what are the kinds of media and presentation strategies and public history strategies that have been used more recently.
Nice.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I just want to sort of add about this series, and I think when this series started in start of 2022, so we're rapidly approaching our 4 years, maybe a bit ambitious. I think it's about 3.5 years at this point. I don't think we could have conceived that we'd be at a point with, by the end of this series, I think 42 posts, including the introductions and then all the contributions. I think going back to how this ties it, like what you can expect from this series ties in, I think, to your first question, Jessica, around like how have things changed? And I think the contributors we've had to this are evidence of just how expansive the field of circumpolar visual cultures is. The fact that this is a growing field of inquiry, I think, is what we really see in this part as well. I mean, we obviously targeted our call towards junior scholars in the field, to early career researchers, but you never know what you're going to get. And we were blown away by the contributions and the submissions we got, and the fact it was important for us to run them all and not to reject any of our contributors, to really just show that no, this is a sort of a really legitimate and growing field of inquiry. So I think that's what you can really expect from this, is not sort of a series that reached part 5 and maybe should, take a break, but actually showing the importance of bringing in guest editors like Sarah, who come at this with a very different perspective, who come at this and are able to draw in a different crowd. I think that's what NiCHE is amazing for allowing and supporting. And then in turn, the fact that we can draw in so many different perspectives at NiCHE, I think, is really a testament to the space that you've created to support and encourage junior scholars to feel that their work is equally valuable in these fields. So
I do think that we do that really well. And I've definitely had a hand in that, but like, we're just NiCHE is very unique in that way, I find, in the space. And it's so important to make people feel like they're welcome and you belong, like you belong in NiCHE, you watching.
No, I think I would reiterate everything Izzy said. It's a very supportive space to be a part of. It's great to be in conversation with all of these different scholars, and I think it is really accessible in a way that not every platform that aims to be public facing pulls off. So,
it's I often get questions from other blogs being like, how do you publish so much? And I'm like, I don't know. But now that we put out series calls, we get, like 10, 20 more, proposals, like, and we're publishing like Monday through Saturday right now. It's like, it's pretty wild. I think that as a group, not just the core NiCHE, because NiCHE is more than the people on the executive or the editorial team. Like, I think it's a special community, and happy that I could support Isabelle, and I can't wait for part 6.
Izzy's like, oh my God, please no. but
Um,
the demand is out there.
the demand is there. Izzy's coming back for another year on the editorial team, so we'll see where it goes.
There will almost certainly be a part 6, knowing me.
I understand. I'm the same way. I'm preparing for Queering the Environment part 4. So yeah. Anyways. Thank you to you both for your work on this series. Izzy for being a great colleague and coworker, and Sarah for being an awesome editor as well as a contributor in the past. Appreciate both of you. It was nice to talk to you today.
Thank you for having us, Jessica.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica. Our pleasure.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.